Welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to be talking about dictionaries. It's not a dictionary like what you've heard before where it's got words in it and meanings of a word. These are actually allows you to be able to store a value, a key, and then be able to assign a value to that key. Other languages like Perl, they're called a hash. There are other data structures that are somewhat similar in other languages, but a dictionary is a very high level language data structure. So you'll use dictionaries a lot in programs that you write. Now, in simple programs, you may not, but as you start writing more complicated Python programs, you will start using dictionaries. And if you start looking at code that somebody else has produced, dictionaries are used quite a bit. So you'll see a lot of dictionaries and lists in Python code. So how do we create a dictionary? Well, the dictionary syntax looks like this, to where you have a variable. You could be anything you want. You can name it anything that you'd like. And you set it equal to the equals key, the equals symbol, and then a squiggly open bracket, a key, which could be anything. It could be a number, it could be a string, it could be another variable, for example. And then you would have a value that's associated with key 1, key 2, and then its value that's associated with key 2 up to key n. So this may be a little bit confusing. The best way to explain this is just to give some examples, and that usually clarifies it. Also, you can create an empty dictionary, and the way that you do that is I'm going to create a variable here called myvar, and I'm going to set it equal to the open squiggly bracket and then the close bracket, squiggly bracket, which that means it's an empty dictionary. Doesn't have any keys or values associated with it. You can create a dictionary with some initial values, like here I create a dictionary called dict. D-I-C-T is equal to, and then I'm going to have a key called name, and I'm going to assign that to my name, and then I'm going to have another key called gender and assign that as male. Since we know how to create a dictionary, we need to talk about how to access elements of a dictionary. So if we have a dictionary, very similar to the one that we just defined a minute ago, except I'm going to also add a social security number of 1234. SSN refers to social security number, or shorthand for social security number. To reference this key in the dictionary, I can write the name of the variable, dict, and then a square open bracket, the name of the key that I want to refer to, which in this example is SSN, a closing square bracket, and that will reference this dictionary, that key, and this should return the string 1234. So if you copy and paste this into a Python compiler, execute it, should return 1234, actually a string 1234. Since we know now how to access elements of a dictionary, what about assigning new elements or adding new key values to a dictionary? So on one way to do this, let's create a dictionary called an empty dictionary called variables, and we create it like this. Then to add a key, name my key, and a value and its value of equal to my value, you would set it just like this, where you have variables, the open square bracket, then the key, which in this example is my key, set that equal to my value. And then to set a variable called age, or set a key called age in variables, you set it up this way, and in this example we set it equal to 12. One thing to note is these data types are not the same, and they don't have to be. My key has a value of my value, and age has a value of 12, which is an integer, and my value is a string. So if we print out variables, we should get something that looks like this. Okay, since we know how to assign new values, one little exercise that you could do is maybe create your own. Take this example here and add a few new keys and assign it to different values. See what works and what doesn't work. The keys here don't have to be the same data type either, so you don't have to use strings here. You could use other values there as well. So you could have variables, open bracket, 1 equals, and then equal to whatever you want it to be. It could be any data type you want it to be. So try a few different examples here and see what works and see what doesn't work. And if something doesn't work, try to figure out why. We can also modify a dictionary. And let's say that we have the same dictionary that we have up here, variables. We haven't changed it at all. We could print it out if we wanted to, print out what we have here, my key, value, and age. We can then update the age key to contain the value of 13 by writing it like this. And if you print that out, you get what we have right here. So it updates the 12 to a 13. Okay, we've talked about how to create a dictionary, how to create an empty dictionary, how to add elements, new keys or elements to the dictionary, how to modify elements in the dictionary. I think the last thing that we need to talk about is how to remove elements from a dictionary. And so the way we can do this is we can just, there's a keyword called del that means delete, D-E-L, and you just specify the name of the dictionary and the key you want to delete, and it will remove that element. So here's an example that does that. Spend some time, maybe try to add some elements, try to delete some elements, maybe try to delete a key that isn't there, and see what happens. You should get an error. So let's look, so far, mostly what we've looked at is where the key are strings. And so let's look at an example to where the keys are something else. So for example, here's a dictionary called data, and we have the values 1, 2, 3. And really what this dictionary does is if we give it, there's several different ways you can look at this, but if you give it a number, it'll give you the word representation of that number. And so far, the only values that we have is 1, 2, and 3. And there may be a reason for that. Maybe those are the only possible values. And for some reason, we're wanting to do a lookup, kind of like what a dictionary does. You look up a word to see what it means. Well, this kind of can do the same thing. So if we look up this key 1, which is an integer, we can see what the string representation of that is. So here, if we print out data 1, it'll output 1. So one little exercise you could do here is to pause the video, copy and paste this into a compiler like Thony, and then maybe add a couple extra numbers out here, like 4 or 5, maybe your age, whatever your age is. Let's say you're 20, you would add a key of 20 and then type out the string 20 as a word, and maybe try to print that out and see if it prints out properly. So in this exercise here, we've shown that the key doesn't necessarily have to be a string. It could be something else if you want it to be. It actually could be almost anything. Usually, though, what I've noticed from my experience is that it's usually a number or a string or something like that. The value here could be anything you want it to be. It could actually be a list. It doesn't have to be a string. It doesn't have to be a number. It could be a list. It could be, in a few weeks, we'll be talking about another data structure that's very important in Python called a class. You could actually have a class instance be one of these values here. So it doesn't necessarily have to be what we see here. What this allows for is for us to be able to write very complex, very powerful programs in the future by the flexibility that Python gives us here. So that's very exciting. But before we can do any of that stuff, we've got to learn these basics. So that way, whenever you're looking at code, you have those basics, those basic building blocks, so that you know how to add. You can look at some code and can kind of understand what's going on. So let's say we want to be able to loop through a bunch of variables, and let's say print out what what all of the keys and the values are in a dictionary. There is a function in a dictionary called items that will retrieve each key value element in a dictionary, one at a time. And so if you print out, if you would type out variables items, you do that in Python shell, or you do a print around these. If it doesn't print out anything, it'll output something like this. And this is just a fancy way of dictionary values. All it really is a list, is really what it is, but it's a way to let somebody know that this is a key pair of a key and a value, a list of these values. And so we can print out each key and value by writing a loop like this: for key, comma, value in variables items, print key and value. So what happens is this for loop will execute the number of times for the number of key values that you have in your list. Like, for example, up here we have two. We have this one, and then we have this one. And so for the first time through the loop, what it will do is it'll grab the first item here that it sees, and it'll put my key in the key variable here, and it'll put my value in the value variable here, and then it will print those out. It'll do whatever's in the for loop. Then the second time through the list, it'll come here, it'll see that key is equal to age, value is equal to 13, and we'll print out that value. And so our output is this here, as we see. Now, feel free to go in here and modify variables, create another dictionary, do whatever you want to do to experiment with this a little bit, and write a for loop similar to what I've got here and print out the values and see how this works. Play around with it a little bit until you understand what's going on. Now, there's times to where we don't want to retrieve the key and value at the same time. Sometimes we just want to retrieve the keys. And so we can do that by, there's a function called keys that's associated with a dictionary, to where we could just say variables, which is the name of the dictionary, dot keys, open parenthesis, close parentheses, and it will return a list of the keys, which with our variables, we have two keys, one that's called my key, the other one's called age. And one thing I want to point out, and I should have pointed this out while I was talking about the last example. If you run your code and if your dictionary keys comes out different than mine, for example, let's say age is before my key. Let's say it said, instead of it saying my key age, maybe it says age and then my key. That's okay. A dictionary is an unordered list of items. In other words, what that means is there is no specified order to how the keys and how the keys are stored in the dictionary. Now this is some internal stuff here, so I'm not going to go really deep into it. But the dictionary, whenever you add, you remove elements, stuff like that. The dictionary, to try to stay kind of optimal, so that way it can run quick, it may not store the keys in the exact same order as you insert them in. They may be different. So if you create a dictionary, and if you create it like the way I did for variables, where my key is first and age is second, there is no guarantee that whenever you try to list out the keys like what I do here, that my key will be first and age will be second. There's no guarantee. It could actually be the other way around. But in most cases, you know, it'll probably come out looking the way I have here. But if something happens to it, and this can change depending on the compiler, the different versions of the compiler, they're constantly making changes and making corrections and making improvements. So if you're running a slightly different version of the compiler than what I'm running, it could produce a slightly different result. So whenever, to be able to print out each key one at a time, it's very similar to the for loop that we saw before, but instead of using items like what we did before, we'd use variables.keys, and what it does is it's going to return one key at a time. So we'll say for, and then some variable, which you could write key. Quite often, if I have a for loop, it's really small, I will use a single character like I, K, or something like that, just to save some typing, and that's okay. And so I use the variable I here to represent what the key is, and then I print out that value. And so here it outputs my key and then age. So what I would suggest that you do is maybe create a dictionary, add some items to it, then try to run a for loop and see what it produces for you. Maybe run it a couple different times and see if it actually produces it in the same order each time. It may output it in the same order every time, but that's not, excuse me, that's not guaranteed. It could actually have the output, instead of saying my key and age, it actually could say age and my key the first time you run it, and then the next time you run it, it's actually switched around the other way. Now there's times to where we may only be interested in retrieving the values in a dictionary, and we're not really that concerned about the keys. There's times that you would think, well, why would I want that? There have been times, I can't think of an example right now, but there are instances to where you are only interested in returning, where you're only interested in the values, and you're not interested in what keys actually hold those values. Maybe you're trying to find the min or the max, and you don't really care which key contains that. You're just wanting to know what the min and max is, because maybe you're doing something to where you're creating a chart or a graph, and you just need to figure out what the min and max is, so that way you know what your dimension should be for like X and Y on a chart or something you're producing. And so the values works very similar to how the keys function does. So to print out all the values, you could write variables in this example, dot values. And what that will do is it'll output a list that looks like this, my value and then 13. Now remember, just like with the keys, the values may be out of order. So you may have my value, then 13, or it could be swapped around the other way where it says 13 and then my value. And then using a for loop, you can print out what those values are. So in this example, I'm using a V to represent values. And so it'll take the values one at a time, put it in the variable V, and then we'll output that value. So I think that's it. The next part down here, I've actually moved this example to be part of the file IO that we'll talk about next week. I've moved that around, but I don't have that changed here in the file that I'm looking at that has our lecture notes in it. So that's about it for this week. Feel free to use these examples. Also, if you want to learn more about dictionaries, you can just pop open a browser and type in Python dictionaries into Google or some other browser or search engine. And the data structures, actually, the docs, the official docs may be a little bit complex, but this is definitely a great place to go learn about different things. Like, for example, here we've got data structures, and we want to come down here where it says dictionaries. And here's some examples here. So there's tons of examples here on how to do different things. You can read about dictionaries up here, and then down here, here's some examples that shows you how to create a dictionary called TEL, which I assume is going to be like maybe a telephone extension, 4-digit extension. And here we have Jack, his extension, Safe, and then his extension. And here we're adding in Gordo and adding in an extension for him, and then we're outputting that, and we see that that Gordo has been added. You can reference each element at a time. You can delete an element. You can add a new element in. You can actually do a list of TEL, and that will give you what the keys are. You can sort it. There's a lot of different things you can do, things we have not talked about. There's tons of things that you can do with dictionaries, and I'm just showing you the highlights. We could spend almost all the semester just talking about lists, string functions, and dictionaries. But I don't want to do that. I would rather give you the highlights for each one of these, enough for you to be able to go and explore more if you'd like. They go into looping techniques that you can use, like the items here. There's also a function called enumerate, which we're not even going to talk about, but it'll print out the location in this list of where each of these items are located. So this is in the 0th location. So notice it starts with 0 and it starts counting up. There's tons of other things that it does. And some of this actually, it started off, it looks like, with strings here, with dictionaries here, and then it went off to other things. But, feel free to look at the dictionary, or if this seems a little advanced for you, feel free to go back. And of course, for this example, what they show here isn't too bad. But there's also, if we go back, there's tons of stuff out here on the web about dictionaries. A deep dive into dictionaries. Of course, that's a Udemy class. And then there's some information here at the W3 Schools of Dictionaries. And Real Python is a good resource where it talks about it. So feel free to go out and learn a little bit more about Python dictionaries if you'd like. And the internet's just plumb full of resources. Here, there's a cheat sheet so you can do a Google search on that. And some of these little cheat sheets here will give you some of the things that you can do. One of them here should be about dictionaries. I'm not seeing it right away. But feel free to go out and look at one of these. If there's one of these that you really, really like, let me know about it. If it seems to cover a lot of things that we're talking about, and I may put that on on Blackboard for us. So that's about it for today. Feel free to look over the notes a little bit more. Be adventurous. Be curious about what things will do. Hey, let me try this. Let me try that. And let me see what works. Also, if we look here, if we skip this example that I have here, let me go down a little bit. And this we will actually look at this example in the file IO. But there's some additional exercises down here that'll ask you to do certain things like calculate or create a dictionary that contains certain things and then do stuff with them. and stuff like that, and see if you can get that to work, get some of those exercises to work if you'd like to learn more. So that's about it for this week in this video. I'll see you next time.